Guys, I'm Ariyl Onstott, and I'm joined by Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene. Congresswoman, thanks so much for joining me this afternoon.
Thanks for having me on.
Awesome. Okay, so Congresswoman, I have a lot of questions for you, and I know we want to get to them. So you've recently decided to step down from Congress, and I'd love to know what was going through your mind. What was the tipping point to say, this is enough?
Well, I actually put out a statement and a video on that, and my video reflects exactly my reasons and why I made this very important decision. I've spent 5+ years fighting for the Republican Party, fighting for America First policies, defending President Trump, campaigning for him not only in Georgia but all across America. I've spent millions of dollars supporting the president and Republican candidates and the Republican Party. I'm also a member of Congress in the Republican Conference in good standing, having paid all of my dues into the NRCC, which is significantly important, and being a member of Congress supporting my party. However, unfortunately, President Trump called me a traitor after I stood with the Epstein victims, and those were women that were raped at 14 or 16, victimized, trafficked by Jeffrey Epstein, and who have demanding for years and years for all of the files and information to be released. And, you know, this is something that I feel strongly about. I don't think this should be a political issue. It's not right versus left. It's literally right versus wrong. And so it's important to stand with these women, and I really hope to see all of the files be released.
Do you feel like you would have stayed in office if there hadn't been this infighting about the Epstein files?
Well, you know, of course, I've been here working as hard as possible, representing Georgia's 14th district, which I love. It's filled with so many wonderful people, hardworking people, small businesses, larger industries, and beautiful little cities across rural Northwest Georgia. And I have been committed to doing that. And for me, it's about accomplishing what needs to be done for the people that voted for us. I take my job title very seriously, representative. However, when the president calls me a traitor, says he's going to primary me, which would have put my very sweet district in such a difficult position, I think that's incredibly unfair. And I don't think that's any way the leader of the Republican Party, who is the president, should treat his most loyal members of Congress. I have a 98% voting record with President Trump. So I have not split from him very much at all, but it came down to the Epstein files and these women that were raped and had been treated so awfully by the government that has kept a cover up for decades now. But it was the death threats that came in on behalf of President Trump's hateful words and his rhetoric, a pipe bomb threat on my home, on our family construction business, multiple pizza doxing deliveries, and then direct death threats on my own son that took it to a very serious level. And I think any person watching this can understand that when it gets to that point, especially after the political violence that we've seen in America on the right and the left, between President Trump being shot at a rally, Governor Shapiro's home in Pennsylvania, arson being committed there and their family home being set on fire, Minnesota lawmakers being killed and shot, and ultimately Charlie Kirk being assassinated on a college campus. I think people can understand that that's a bar that has been set too high that makes it worth it.
Congresswoman, I'd like to ask you a little bit about what you consider to be your greatest achievements during your nearly 5 years in Congress, and is there anything else you wish you could have achieved?
It's really been working for the people in the district. We created an office that had great symmetry between my DC office and my district office. And my district office does great work for constituents, that's services for veterans, seniors and Social Security, people that need help on their taxes, any place that anyone needs help within the federal government. And our office does a great job of that. but it was also the work that we did out in the field that was connected to my DC office, where we really looked for community needs, whether they're a city project or a county project, and then submitting those needs through the appropriations process here in the House of Representatives to take their hard-earned tax dollars from the federal government and bring them back home. And those are road projects, water projects, community projects, trails, airports. So that's the work that a lot of people don't hear much about, but I think that's the most important work, and I've very much enjoyed it.
Congresswoman, we know that State Senator Colton Moore has announced he's going to run for your seat, and I'm sure there's going to be others. So what kind of leader does your district need? Is there anyone that you support as your successor, and what would you hope for them?
So I've already announced I will not be endorsing anyone to run for Congress in the 14th district, because I very much respect the people, the voters there, and their choice. And I think it needs to be their choice alone, without people like me pushing someone on them. And I know there'll be, many more candidates announcing, but I really hope the next representative really stays committed and true to the district and builds the work that I just spoke of, making sure that the district's needs are not only met through legislation and voting on the House floor, but that are met in a very important way to bring their own tax dollars back down to the rural cities and counties that usually need a lot of help from the federal government.
Congresswoman, I'd like to ask as well, as you've spoken about your safety concerns and how you really feel like that was a big part of this conversation to making this decision, tell me a little bit about, do you feel that you've had to go about this decision differently as a female lawmaker than if you were a man? Do you feel like you're held to a different standard at all?
That's an interesting question, and it's a problem we're having in our Republican conference. Other female Republicans, members of Congress like myself, have been outspoken very lately about how we feel that we have not been taken seriously, that our legislation has not been brought to the floor for votes. We saw Elise Stefanik last week had a very public a feud with Speaker Johnson on one of her amendments that was extremely important. We've seen Anna Paulina Luna. She's got a discharge petition open now on a piece of legislation she feels is extremely important. And we saw Nancy Mace write a very brutally true op-ed in the New York Times addressing this issue. And I can tell you I completely agree with these women. And this is a problem that Republicans have. The Republican Party as a whole has trouble getting the female vote across America. And I hope this is an issue that the Republican Party reflects on and figures out how to fix this. But yes, I think it is serious when it comes to death threats. The President of the United States enjoys the most safe and secure protection through the Secret Service of any American, and he needs it. He needs it, and I'm very thankful that he and his family have that, as well as the Vice President, the cabinet members, but so does the Speaker of the House and leadership in the House of Representatives. But members like myself, whether rank and file members, whether we're women or men, we have no Secret Service detail. We have no protection. And if we have security, we have to hire that ourselves. So when it comes to the amount of death threats that I've had, that's a pretty difficult thing to deal with. But it's unfortunately commonplace on both the right and the left. And I don't think it should be this way.
Do you feel like this is part of the divide that's happening in the Republican Party? Do you feel there is a divide that's growing?
I think there's a divide in both parties, and we see it in the Democrat Party. You can see the progressives that push back and more the mainstream Democrats. The Republican Party has its divide where you can see the more establishment or neocon foreign war supporting Republicans versus, say, MAGA and America First. So I think both parties have their different division. However, I think for the future, I think many Americans on the right and the left are looking for America-focused policy makers, especially when it comes to economic populism. I think a lot of people are just saying, hey, look, we want to be able to afford the cost of living. We want to feel hopeful for the future with jobs and housing, and we desperately need solutions for the healthcare crisis.
You know, it's interesting you bring that up because we spoke about the healthcare crisis the last time we were speaking together. And Congresswoman, I'm curious, you know, we've talked a lot about affordability. What do you think needs to be done there? It's something that it seems to be a buzzword right now, affordability. How do you think we tackle that issue?
Well, we have to look at what is the core root of inflation and why has the value of the dollar shrunk, and why won't our dollar go very far anymore? And you can directly tie that to government spending. The acceleration of government spending in the recent years, especially in the past decade, has driven inflation, and that is a failure of Congress to never ever pass a balanced budget. Congress only increases the debt, and it's now $38 trillion. But that also is linked to the ability to build a strong economy, and that's important for everyone, whether you're someone earning a daily wage, or you're a small business owner, or you're an industry giant. Having a strong economy in America links directly to the power of the dollar, and it links directly to the cost of living. And so these are the kind of things that I think Republicans and Democrats should look towards one another and find common ground on how to help Americans, because none of this is changing and it's only going to get worse. I'll point to a future crisis. Right now it's healthcare, but in just a few years, people are going to start talking about Social Security, because it will be insolvent in 2033. And as quick as time is going by, and we discussed that before we came on, 2033 will be here before we know it.
Yeah. Before we know it, Congresswoman. You know, a final question for you. A Democratic candidate just won the Miami mayor's race for the first time in 30 years over a Trump-backed candidate. Is this signaling a shift that's coming? What do you think?
I do think so, and we've seen it in multiple elections as of late, whether it's been special elections across the country or this mayor's race. And I've been very honest with my Republican colleagues that I feel that Republicans are going to lose the midterms. And I think races like the one in Florida, where I think it was 30 years that Republicans had held the mayor's seat down there in Miami, and then to see it flip to a Democrat is a large signal that Republicans need to deliver what the campaign promises are that we made, and that if you want people to vote for you, you basically got to get a 100 on customer service, and that's what people are looking for. I will say that the past 4 years under the Biden administration, there was tremendous Democrat failure there, but I think the Republican Party, especially here in Congress, have been shooting ourselves in the foot by not passing legislation that reflects the agenda that people had voted for, and ultimately that responsibility falls on the Speaker of the House.
Congresswoman, we thank you so much for your time. A very quick end here. What's next? How do you plan to spend all your free time?
Oh my goodness, I have no decisions, but I'm sure it's going to be, I look forward to a lot of time with family and friends, and hopefully some great vacation time.
Congresswoman, thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. We do appreciate it. And thank you guys so much for streaming along here with us. So we'll be right back.